Christine Kennedy and our other panelists and our wonderful moderator, Gwendy, who have graciously given up part of their Sunday to talk about the challenges and rewards of working on larger artworks. I'm Elizabeth Hulings, director of the Clark Hulings Foundation, and we're thrilled to be doing this kind of programming as much as we can, and thanks to everybody. Wendy, who's our moderator, has graciously agreed to do this. She's the founder of Original Women. She's passionate about art, culture, craft, and design. Original Women is a social enterprise dedicated to celebrating the artistry, design, and cultural heritage of women from around the world. Her career has been international and spans business, finance, nonprofit, and cultural sectors. So we're very pleased to have Wendy join us. Without any more from me, I'll let this get started.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's really great for me to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very, very happy to be part of this event today from the Clark Hulings Fund, and especially with the beautiful works of Tim that are on the walls here. So I'm going to start with you, Tim. I'm going to give a little your bio. So Tim Kennedy received his BFA from Carnegie Mellon, an MFA from Brooklyn College, and attended the Skowhegan School. You've received a number of prestigious individual artist grants, including from the Clark Hulings Fund, which helped make this exhibition possible.
Thank you.
And we're very happy to see the work. The Paul Glasner Foundation and the Indiana Arts Commission and the Arts Councils of Indianapolis. You've been written about and your artwork has been written about in numerous publications, and you exhibit your work here at the First Gallery in New York, among other places. When you're not painting, I guess you're a senior lecturer of painting at the Indiana University of Bloomington. And you say your work embraces all of the genres, but you repeatedly turn to themes of domestic, interior, and landscape. You work primarily from observation, so not photographs, and directly from the motif. So with that in mind, how do you choose the size of your canvas?
Well, first of all, I mean, a lot of the, I'll know that I'm interested in a particular subject or doing a particular kind of thing, and I might, a lot of the things you can see, they're landscapes of particular sites, and I might do several paintings on a site, and I can see it becoming something else. For instance, there are a few paintings of this lake near us in Indiana, and I had done several landscapes of it, but I could see it becoming a figure composition. And in fact, this painting is based on that one over there, with the trees framing the little dock structure. And so I started, I actually gridded up a portion of that painting and started a large canvas. And I generally do pick somewhere around the range of 5 or 6 feet, just because if I want a figure to be in a painting, I want it to be a pretty good size.
Okay.
And so I transferred toward composition and actually models posed in the studio. And so I had them do that. So I mean, it looks like it could be a situation. I'm not taking this out of the lake.
Yes.
So, although I did actually, to paint the car, I tied the entire painting to a dumpster and parked my car so that I could see it. And paint it from it. But the large painting of the family, they all came to the studio and posed.
Okay.
So that's, you know, it just, some things need a large canvas. Not all of them, but some of them do.
And mostly figures you like to.
Well, when they get to that size, I guess, at least to this point, it's mostly, it had figures in them. And like I say, it's a comfortable size to paint the figure.
So when in the process does the more, shall we say, practical considerations come in?
It's always in the back of my mind, and I know it's going to be a headache, and then on some level, I don't care. But I mean, I've had, outrageous situations over the years. I mean, my wife, Eve Mansdorf, is a wonderful painter too, but some of the craziest situations. I mean, it was an 8-foot painting of hers that's actually in my studio because we don't have any place to put it. We actually had to saw the stretcher frame in half and fold it in half, which you've probably dealt with before. You know, logistics, they're just a physical reality, and you have to deal with them. A lot of times I've driven to work here with a box truck, which I hate doing. This show I was able to, we soft packed the larger paintings, and our shipper was able to take them. And I mean, an unnamed shipping company, like nationally known, I sent a painting that was around 5 feet, and it came back with a hole in the box.
In the box or in the painting?
And not in the painting, thank goodness. But I mean, you know, it's like these horrifying kinds of things. But we were able to ship this stuff with an art shipper, which was great. And then the rest of it fit in our car. So, but the biggest ones are always the headache.
So that's a consideration. So Lucy, if I can turn to you for a second. Hello. So this is Lucy Rorech. Lucy grew up in London, between London and a working farm, right, in rural England.
In the countryside.
In the countryside, how wonderful, English countryside. And you said you were raised by an Anglo-Indian mother and a thoroughly British father, so definitely some cultural diversity there.
Mm-hmm.
And your family was passionate about travel, and you've gone to many, many places around the world. You've been living in New York for 20 years, right? And you're really devoted to extraordinary things in the contemporary as well as vintage worlds of art, fashion, and design. So you've launched your curatorial and art consulting business, the Curate Group, to uncover talented artists who create pieces that are relevant, relatable, and stimulating. So in your business, does size matter?
Oh, Gwendy, absolutely. I have a broad range of clients, but mostly from the New York and tri-state area. They gravitate towards the larger works that I show them in artist studios or on my website. I think that for them, purchasing one piece that can anchor a room is very appealing. I think that many of the people that I consult with have moved from small apartments into family homes, as I said, either in Brooklyn or in the tri-state area, and they're really trying to stamp their personalities on these homes that they've purchased. And large pieces of art, so many reasons to buy a large piece, but one of the things that I think is particularly relevant is that a large piece of art really can set the focus for a room. If you walk into a room and you see a large piece of art on one wall, it conveys a lot about the personality of the family that live there, and can set a colour scheme for a room, and as I said, become a focus point that's very important. So yeah, I'm definitely seeing, I'm not going to call it a trend because I've only been in my business for the last 18 months, and I'm sure that this has been going on for much longer, but I'm certainly seeing a propensity towards large pieces of art.
And are there challenges with a large piece of art for you in what you do in advising? I would imagine people want to see their artwork in their homes or...
Certainly, and one of the things that I'm pretty headstrong about in my business, where possible, is allowing my clients to road test, if you will, the art in their homes before they write the check. And Jacob can definitely speak to this more than I can, but the challenges and the costs involved in me being able to provide that service to my clients can definitely eat into the overall budget, but I think that it's worth it. I think that even clients that may in their mind think that they want a large piece of art and see it in a gallery, when they see it on their own wall, it's a very different animal, and for the most part, that surprise is one that is pleasant for people. But yeah, you'll definitely find the odd client that hasn't quite envisaged what the work will be like when it hangs in their home, and for them sometimes they can find it overpowering.
So Jacob, since Lucy was talking to you, so you are on the advisory board of the Clark Hulings Fund. You have about 20 years as a museum professional and in the arts, with the Asia Society as a registrar, as well as implementing programming and opening 2 new centers for the Asia Society. And now you are the technical service coordinator for WOVO, is that?
WOVO.
WOVO,
Yeah,
okay. A state-of-the-art, and there's no pun intended, storage, handling, and collections management company. So we were talking a little bit earlier, about some of the challenges, and this is just alluded to, and town certainly with having to saw the stretchers to fold the painting to move it. So what about working large?
Well, I mean, you have what we normally do. I mean, there are a lot of options for if you're talking working large is, I actually would say it was a trend right now. Big is in, and it seems that the more objects, not just 2D objects, but 3D objects kind of seem to be getting larger and larger. And we are in the process of outfitting an enormous storage facility, and the needs, every time gallerists come in, they always want the doors to be larger than they are. So we have, I think we have a 16-foot wide, it's kind of a garage door, and that's not quite big enough yet. So we're getting requests. I think earlier this week on Tuesday, I received a request for an object that was 20 by 20. That's the footprint of the piece. And so there is a bit of a trend for larger works. And if you work with the right people, I think you can kind of you can make it kind of easy in terms of getting it into your home. There are all kinds of options. One of which is cutting the stretcher bars, in half. Although what a lot of people forget about is when you cut the wood, you lose generally the blade width and so it won't go back necessarily the same. They actually do make stretcher bars that are made to fold, which a lot of companies can make and you can use pretty easily. You can also roll and take the stretcher bars apart. We've done all kinds of things to meet the needs of our clients, including rigging into those tall apartment buildings on the Upper East Side. We've also carried up and down paintings if they're a little oversized for the elevator. I think maybe within the last month, I believe I sent 2 gentlemen that work with me to carry a piece that was just about 6 feet long down 15 flights of steps. And when they got to the 4th flight of steps, they had a caution tape across the steps because someone had just painted between the 4th and 3rd floor. And the team that we work with, they did their due diligence. They contacted the superintendent immediately, found out how recently that area had been painted, and moved forward with the project. But these anomalies are almost standard, so you get kind of used to those things that come up, and you try to work around them.
So you have to be creative.
Very creative, but it's the focus is safety, not just of the artwork, but of the crew. And so there's one of the other things that I didn't bring up was so occasionally people will ride paintings on top of elevators. It's something that can be done, but it's not something that's necessarily safe, and so it's something that we don't do. I think I said to you earlier, one of the a gentleman that I work with, a collector that I worked with a few years ago through the Asia Society. Occasionally, he would have some of his oversized pieces released to windshield washers, who would then use their washing equipment. They would put the painting on the rigging, and actually we release it to them, and then they would bring it up to his apartment and they would bring it in through the window. So, I don't exactly feel that that's the safest method, and that's not something that we normally we would do. But there are other options. And again, sometimes it has to do with price point. But what we normally do is set up a site visit and come to whoever the home or the institution, if it's a museum, and basically just take measurements. I mean, there's no new school way to handle it. It's pretty much a tape measure and some math. But there's almost nothing in New York City that we can't get into a building, believe it or not.
Well, but that comes at a price, right?
It does. It absolutely does. Yeah.
And so that would have an effect if, for example, you're a painter and
Mhm.
you're trying to move your artwork cross country, or a collector who's looking at a new piece, or has a piece and they want to move it. So where do you think that that consideration falls? Like how big?
The safety concerns and stuff like that, that probably isn't. I've done some fairly nutty things just to get this stuff across the country and stuff, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask about that. And I probably have, be much more circumspect.
Yeah. The artists generally. I mean, there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Right.
I guess is the right way to put it. And what we try to do is, and one of the reasons why Volvo brought me in is because of my museum background. And museums generally set the bar in terms of best practices for the art services industry. And so that's one of the reasons why they brought me in, so that we can make sure that at least at Volvo, we're able to kind of keep the bar pretty
That's the
high.
way it should be.
Yeah.
Just sometimes if you're on the other end of it and you have a very, very limited budget, you have to cut corners.
Yeah, and it happens, but one of the things that we try to do with our clients, and I've tried to do over the years, especially working with artists directly, is provide them more than one option, and provide them options that are kind of within their reality, within their own reality. Again, safety a lot of times is kind of the big thing. I mean, the two gentlemen who had to carry down the painting 15 flights, they were young. They're young. They stopped. I think they said they stopped either every 3 or 5 flights. There's measures that we put in place to make sure that everything is kind of above board. It's unfortunate to hear about the painting that you said had been damaged before. It's kind of
the painting was not.
Oh, the painting was not.
It was just and again, one of the ways of cutting corners probably would be to use like a standard shipper, but I'm trying to make a very nice, like a sturdy box and that kind of. And it was sturdy enough, but just barely.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm getting to the point in my life where I'm thinking, well, maybe it's just not worth it to do that. Maybe an art shipper is a better way to go.
Yeah.
So.
And a lot of times the value of the artwork plays a role in that. I mean,
this is true.
Most of your DHL, FedEx, UPS, I believe their max is $5,000 coverage. So if you're under $5,000, you can legitimately ship with them. I mean, we all are kind of familiar with their shipping methods for those of us who order shoes and whatnot online. It's pretty prevalent right now. But they do have a max on there on what they will cover. And like I said, I believe it's $5,000. And if the work is within that, then it is an option. It's not one that I would necessarily suggest, but with the appropriate packing, it might be. If it's a small piece, possibly. If it's glazed with acrylic, maybe not glass. There's things that we can help you out with in terms of.
The smaller piece, there is just less chance that anything is going to happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so you take a chance with it, I suppose. But
Mm-hmm.
again, when you just the weight of the larger paintings, and then these by no means are the largest. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like you were saying, 20 by 20 footprint. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
But they have an inherent weight themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to fall on themselves in some fashion. They can really do damage to themselves.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that the technology has changed. Actually, believe it or not, just in terms of cardboard and the materials that we use, even in the time, even during my career in the last 20 years, the potential for packing material, or the possibility for packing materials, they've grown so dramatically. And it really, it depends on what the object is, you know, you want to match the appropriate packing materials with the appropriate object. In this case, we're talking about 2D, I believe they're oil on canvas. So it's pretty standard, but you know, if you're shipping stone or if you're shipping bronze, anything like that, you have an entirely different set of needs. And again, whether or not it's a 2D object or a 3D object, kind of plays into those decisions. And again, price point comes into it, and you know, if it's a museum quality piece, you may want to really decide to use the best of the best in terms of materials. And if it's you know, if it's your uncle's painting, like you know my uncle Alex's painting, I might decide to ship it via DHL to my mother. You know, as long as I've packed it.
But Wendy, I think you raised a really good point, which is different for each of us in that, you know, the logistics charges involved in safely shipping large pieces can really eat into the profits. At the Curate Group, we want to make purchasing artwork as easy as possible for our clients, and the after-sales care that we include includes delivery and installation. Some of my clients would tell me that they were the least favourite part of buying art for them was the installation. They would choose something, they would have it sent to them by a gallery, and it would sit wrapped for months before they had a chance to install it. So when I deliver, I also send an installer. So larger pieces mean 2 delivery guys, a bigger truck, and often 2 installers, because the larger pieces are more difficult and unwieldy to transport and install. So I don't know that with the larger pieces, the logistical costs, I don't know that they're really weighted for me personally in my business in a way that's fair.
And that's a great idea, actually. I mean, to kind of be part of the purchasing moment and also the installation moment. It kind of brings it. It's a great idea to bring it full circle. You know, I'm sure we all have stuff again from Amazon that we haven't quite opened yet or needs to go back. But to actually get it on the wall and actually have that moment occur where that ownership is kind of solidified.
And especially with the larger pieces that often require specialised hardware that might not be available in your local hardware store. So if my installer travels with the necessary equipment and hardware to be able to hang pieces at any size, which is a tremendous amount of comfort for me and ultimately the clients too.
I would imagine, because that is a big challenge. I've personally, having tried to do it myself or with some friends, yes.
Are most of your clients in this area, or are they pretty far flung?
They are mostly in this area, although I'm going to say mostly in this area, New York and the tri-state, and then also in England. I have a fair few clients in the UK as well.
So is it a different, set of logistics out there to?
Definitely. Well, when I'm selling prints, I have a printer and a framer in London that I can trust just as much as the people that work for me here. But canvas, I've only ever dealt with rolled up and then stretched on site for some of the reasons that we've just discussed in terms of air freighting something of this size.
Is an artist that makes me nervous, but
it's really interesting. The evolution of packing and fine arts shipping. Actually, I mean, it's not that long ago that rolling paintings and shipping them internationally was pretty standard. I mean, 20 years ago, it was a lot more. It happened a lot more often. The issue now with insurance companies tends to be the value, and so if the value is at a certain point, then the insurance company would require that it be shipped by a fine art shipper. But that's kind of a change in the industry itself, and it's something that kind of people are only starting to think about now, especially with the increase. I mean, every couple of weeks we're seeing a new sale at Sotheby's, whether it's a car or an artwork itself, breaking new numbers, and they need to be moved around the world safely.
One of the other things that's just popped into my head too is that 3 of the artists that I work with that are known for working large work with multi-panel pieces. So not not always one large canvas, but a selection of smaller canvases or sculptures or panels that then go together to make the overall piece. So I don't know if Tim does that too.
Well, I'm poor in strategy, but I do notice when other people are doing it. So I mean, I've been to some of those Gilbert and George pieces where there's several frame pieces that are butted up against one another.
Right.
Or I've seen David Hockney do it. Michael Ray Charles, some of those pieces, I think one of the things that's brilliant about them is that they're meant to look like, kind of sideshow posters. And so they're meant to be treated badly, I suppose, and they just fold them out and stick them up. That's a smart idea.
Well, I mean, it's a good point you bring up about artist intent. What is the artist's intent? I mean, is it for it to live at that point of purchase and live in that state, into infinity, or is it supposed to actually kind of evolve with its own situation? And that's kind of you have to kind of know a little bit about the artists themselves.
A lot of artists, early in their careers, the work was rougher,
Didn't have necessarily the care they might have chosen later on. I mean, that happens a lot with just even the materials artists use, house paint or something like that. Things that are kind of the moment for them, right out of maybe grad school or college or just being, young in their career. They're not necessarily as archivally sound as maybe some other options would have been. It's kind of, I know at least in the museum field, that's kind of bringing objects, especially objects maybe that are made up of detritus or something like that. That's probably the easiest example. How do you keep that object as it was when it entered the collection for 20 years, for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, It's a concern.
Yeah.
Right, so the exploration of materials also has an effect, and that can also have an effect on working large and how you transport it and how you care for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the artist's intent, as these guys have mentioned, especially with larger pieces that are painted on multi-panels, I've seen, and this is not the case with the work that we're surrounded by here today, but I've seen clients that have needed to have a little bit of space in between these large panels. So an artist may have created a triptych that was intended to be hung 1, 2, 3, 3 panels very close together, and for the client they've realised that maybe it's just a little too overwhelming and they've needed to kind of space it out a little bit, maybe a 2 and a 1. And give themselves that little bit of breathing room when something that they brought into their house that they love, but that's very big, starts to become overwhelming. So,
So there you have what you were just talking about. So the artist intent coupled with the collector or the person who's bought the artwork becomes theirs, and they could, in a way, put their mark on it or the interpretation of it. Right.
A lot of the collectors that we work with actually have really good relationships with the artists that they purchase, and so whether they're big names or small names, there are usually relationships that exist there in which they can kind of call them. And we have this happen, with Jeff Koons. People will call him up or call the studio up and say, we'd like to do this, we'd like to, and sometimes they're agreeable and sometimes they're not. But it's interesting that those relationships exist and those opportunities exist to kind of make some changes.
Yeah. One of the things that I was thinking about as we were sitting here and I was looking around is that I've been seeing a lot of large work recently, and I was thinking about the fact that large work has to have a reason for being large. And Tim was talking a bit about this when he was talking about these large works with the figures. Sometimes you'll see large work that, just like a movie or a book that's gone on 20 minutes too long, you can say that about some large work too. And you wonder why the artist didn't scale it back a little bit. Clearly not with Tim's work that we're seeing here, but I think that that's a consideration. And clients that I work with, they notice things like that. So I think that they're very drawn to large artwork, but they've got an eye out for whether or not it really works to be that large.
Okay, so the scale of the order with
Has matched the intent.
Yeah, and the actual execution of whatever that intent was.
Yeah.
It is something that I'm thinking about as I do it. And probably what I internalized when I was, sort of growing up and studying is probably an ABEC sensibility, But what's interesting to think about, we think of the ABEX painters as being really large, but they thought of things in terms of like the scale of a person. And if you look at the first generation of people, more often than not, the individual paintings are not that large. I mean, not that large, meaning this 6-foot canvas. I don't think de Kooning goes into a 7-foot canvas very frequently at all. Except for the really large paintings at the end, I don't think the Bernard Newman's paintings were all that large. And then in the 60s, it really seems to take off.
Yeah, and I'm thinking after I've made that comment that that's not to say that negative space can't play a really important role in large pieces, and in fact sometimes it's essential. But I definitely think that from a curator's perspective, and certainly for some of my clients, they want to have insight as to why the painter went this large. And certainly figures can be, an easy reconciliation. But I think that's definitely one of the considerations for an artist.
Yeah, and for a collector or the person who's responding to the work of art, yeah. So to be able to see that intent and I guess feel whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I guess with many works of art, or sometimes you're in the studio and sometimes something works and sometimes it doesn't. Have you ever changed the scale while you're working on something? Have you ever changed the scale? Like, for example, you were printing out the pictures of the lake, like starting small and then...
Right. Well, this painting gradually got bigger, and that is probably, that painting could become a study for a larger painting. But if you look at it closely, there are actually cuts and seams. It's been...
Yes.
And what had happened was, I'd actually done a straight-on study of that volleyball net. And then I wanted to get a little bit deeper into the stuff around it, the foliage and that kind of thing. But I started on a piece of cardboard and it wasn't big enough, so I added another piece of cardboard and then I added the 2 pieces of cardboard down below. So, and also I think that's a pretty haphazard material. I usually will paint on something that's a little more archival. But like I said, that is very likely going to become a bigger piece. In fact, I've done some studies of the figures.
I was thinking I would like to see that bigger.
There you go. You may get your wish.
So we'd love to see it back here next time. Yes.
3 years.
So, okay, we'll be back. Does anyone, I'd like to open this up to other people here, people who might work large and talk about their experience.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just can you talk, both of you talk, or Sir, can you talk more about once you paint it and you take it from the structure and then you ship over internationally when you put back on, how does that look? Is there any danger, any risk involved? Anything we should pay attention to?
Again, that actually makes me nervous.
That's
And I'll tell you why, and maybe you don't even run into this often anymore, but these are traditional ground paintings, meaning that they're canvas and in some cases linen, and I've done rabbit-skin blue ground on them, which can be a little fragile. And then I do an oil ground on top of that. And so the idea of like taking it off the stretcher, I would do it if I had to, I suppose, but I'd be really worried about it.
Yeah. What about you, Jacob? Have you seen any issues?
I've seen all kinds of issues over a lot of times what we do before we make the jump into actually rolling something, we get a conservator to examine the piece and determine whether or not it is possible to actually roll the piece. The good thing about contemporary artists is that a lot of times you can simply ask someone like Tim right now, what exactly did you do to the piece? Because it really does get down into the nitty-gritty of how the surface was prepared originally, as well as what types of paint they used. And you do really need to have a good recall on whether or not it's acrylic or oil and actually what types of paint. The conservators are pretty well versed in all of those materials. So that's kind of the first thing that you do in terms of deciding whether or not you're going to roll a painting. And then it's a pretty, like I said before, it's a pretty simple, rolling a piece is a pretty simple task. I mean, generally you roll paintings face out, and that's so if the surface breaks a little while you're, depending on the surface, if it breaks a little when you roll it back, those small creases will come together. And when I say break, I mean hairline. Nothing that you would really notice, but there's going to be a pull because you're taking something that is currently flat and you're rolling it. What's going to happen is it's going to expand. That surface is actually going to expand, and so in some cases, depending on the type of material, the surface will actually expand with the roll, and in some cases, it'll actually pull a little. And the good thing about rolling it in that orientation is that when you put it back, it comes back to where it's supposed to be. It'll kind of meet again. If you roll it into itself, you're going to have the paint fighting itself, and that's when paint flakes pop and break and come off. In terms of shipping it, I mean, I wouldn't ship it in a tube if that's the suggestion. You can ship things rolled. I mean, I've worked on a lot of projects where pieces are maybe somewhere just under 20 feet long and maybe 10 feet high, and they've needed to be rolled, or possibly they've been rolled and stored rolled. I mean, that's actually the situation we more often find is that we come into a situation where the painting has been rolled for 10 years or 15 years, and it's time to lay it flat and stretch it. And again, we need to know what the surface is. There's a lot of old style shellac, wax surfaces that are coming to mind right off the bat that are not as easy to work with as something like this, a standard oil canvas situation. And again, we work with conservators to determine how best to stretch that out. And with the stretcher bars, when you have contacts like Lucy does all over the world, you can simply, and measurements are very important, you can simply send measurements to someone who produces stretcher bars, and they can produce the appropriate stretcher bars for your piece. So it's not uncommon for a piece to travel without its stretcher bars, or without its frame for that matter, because where it's going, it's cheaper actually in some cases to have the frame and or stretcher bars fabricated separately than to actually pay to have them shipped. So it is an option, it's a viable option. I mean, there's some old footage of some of the founding members of MoMA carrying pieces in with their hands, with their bare hands, and there's some rolled tubes. Some of the ladies that are carrying pieces in are carrying the pieces in tubes. So I mean, that's only what 50, 60 years ago, and we have come a long way, but some of the technologies are not. Rolling is still a practice that is used, and not necessarily the worst practice, depending on what the artist likes, what the artist's output is. If they're prolific, they may decide that storing in their garage in tubes is easier than storing stuff flat. But again, it's something that gets worked out. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about is. These aren't quick decisions. These are things that there's a lot of thought that goes into them, and a lot of thought that needs to go into them for you to make the best decision.
There are famous stories about that too. I mean, Bernard. Well, first of all, you can see photographs of Bernard. He's unstretched the canvas. He's working in those hotels with that horrible flocked wallpaper. And but there's this story that he when he was working in Normandy in the summers, he had a car And he rolled the thing up and had it on top of the car, and it's like, wow.
Yeah.
So, I don't know whose canvas that is now, but
Yeah, I mean,
it'd be nice to know that history.
Elizabeth said that, Elizabeth of the Hulings Fund. Yeah, Elizabeth said earlier that something large was considered, I think you said that your father considered something that was large if he wasn't able to put it in the back of the station wagon or the backseat of his car, I think
Backseat of his car.
Backseat of his car, so, you know.
I've heard a funny story about that too, because there's Joseph Albers, and I don't know where I heard this story, but somebody was asking him, you know, there's been a bump up in your work. What explains it? What is your intent? It's, we got a station wagon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask a question about how then the change of scale affects the process of observation and the process of painting? And will the structure be more complicated in larger scale? And will the distance, the feeling of distance between the painter and the subject matter change?
Well, there are actually, those are really legitimate concerns, and there are funny problems that end up, and particularly as a person that you know paints almost exclusively from something that I can see. It's hard to do a painting like that portrait because I can't see around it a lot of the time. It's hard to paint portions of this because it was hard for me to, so it's perpendicular to it, I maybe even looking backwards. Mm-hmm. And so that's it's just the idea of the direct experience of painting. You have to account. I mean, there's probably, it's never really true anyway, but you have to accommodate it.
But does the sense of structure change too, the whole painting?
The structure, how do you mean exactly?
The space and the drawing and everything.
Well, I think things will work a little bit, and you get up to a certain size of things, and your vision does work a little bit, and maybe to some extent you're doing that. There's some people that play with that. I mean, Rex Downs, if you know his paintings. They're very interesting because he's deliberately sort of taking the perceptual business to an extreme, and that might start with something that's vertical near the center of the painting, but things as they go off gradually, will sort of orient, and it gives the impression of the curvature of your eye.
Focus.
Yeah. And he can get very extreme. He's looking down. You don't sense it when you're looking at the painting, but he's actually looking down 2 streets. Mm-hmm. So it's, yeah, it's.
Yeah, but looking large, you're looking up and looking down to the
Right. And then somebody, I think it's more of an average kind of perceptual, thing when I do that, and I correct it a little bit. I mean, I don't distort the verticals, but that is a common thing, as some of these paintings did. I mean, this painting, for instance, there was a sense of sort of looking up and down, and you don't sense it so much in the actual painting, but it does happen in real perceptual experience.
Do you ever think of it as you're doing it, as a strategy to start small and then do medium and then do large of the same subject, or similar themes as a way of upselling to the same person?
Upselling.
I mean,
I don't know
you do
if
a small picture, or do you ever find that happens, that someone comes in and says, I acquired one of your works and it was a smaller one and that's all I could manage, and now I'm still fascinated and I can manage a bigger one?
The people that have bought things, I think that it's, first of all, there's no rule ever, at least for me. I noticed certain people are interested in certain ranges of works with different things in them. And the people that have bought the larger figure of things, that's what they were interested in to begin with. And frequently if somebody does buy a bigger, a smaller piece, it's maybe that's all the space that they have. So I haven't seen the relationship yet.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think that in my experience, people are quite willing to shift around the works in their house to accommodate a large piece if it's something that they absolutely fall in love with and have the budget to purchase. And in fact, I've seen people use very large pieces almost as a replacement for wallpaper in their homes and taking up an entire wall. Even if it's a small wall, it takes up the entire wall, and you can tell that they've had to relocate things around their house just to make it work because they've absolutely fallen in love.
So the follow-up. Large is in. Large is expensive. So if you are an artist who's not already some of the people we've been naming here today, and you want to think for a little bit about business consideration in addition to just painting whatever you need to paint, what strategies would you recommend? Like, is it a good idea to go and spend the extra money to start doing larger works, recognizing that that seems to be the way things are going, and then maybe have a bigger payoff because you command a bigger price? Or is that just not a reasonable thing to consider doing because your investment is going to be much greater? I mean, if you're thinking of it from the artist's perspective, what recommendations would you have?
I would say absolutely take that chance, jump in with both feet and try creating something large. Now, of course, that's easy for me to say because I'm not, outlaying for the materials and thinking about how to exhibit the piece, which galleries might allow me to take up so much room, and certainly, which clients have that kind of space in order to purchase a piece. But big is in, and certainly I don't operate my gallery with any kind of online sales component to it, but with the digital technology that now allows virtual galleries to spring up in lieu of these, great but high-rent spaces, it will become easier to show large work online without having to worry about physical space to do it.
Ms. Kennedy, can you talk a little bit more about color decision, which is fascinating in those paintings?
Which is that?
The color.
Oh, just in general. People have said things to me about this sort of thing before. I don't make a conscious effort to. I'm trying to respond to what I'm seeing in some fashion, but people have wondered if I'm hopping things up or something like that. I never feel like that I am necessarily.
But do you have a certain palette, or?
I do. It's a pretty. It's actually a pretty limited palette, but the perceptual painters will use. I might start with two blues, like an ultramarine and maybe a phthalo, alizarin crimson, and a cadmium red light, a cadmium yellow pale, and then a few things beyond that. But it's kind of the core, some earth colors.
Do you guys have any tips on how to keep the work if you are either keeping it on the canvas or taking it off the canvas? You were talking about perhaps rolling it, but I wonder if there's some specifics as to how large you end up rolling it to not.
I was imagining that question myself when you
I should prelude everything by saying that objects should generally be moved and or shipped in their proper orientation. So if it's a 3D object, if it's a toaster, it should move in your standard toaster position. Yeah. That's kind of we all know that if it's a coffee maker, the same thing. If it's a glass, A teapot, for instance, you don't want to put it on its side. You want it to use that foot that it has and pack around it. Because the object is made to be used in that way, so that it's sitting constantly. So the same kind of holds true of the paintings. If you're going to store paintings, you want them ideally to be stretched appropriately and some space in between them. But you were asking more about the rolling. It depends on the size of the piece. We usually use rolling tubes, which it's a sonotube, which is actually a brand name. It's a builder's tube, and they actually they actually use them to pour concrete in to make pilings. You've probably seen them. Have you ever seen someone build maybe a deck on the back of their house? And that's kind of the interesting thing. We talk a lot about. This is what I do. So a lot of what I talk about in terms of materials, a lot of the materials that are used in what we do are just kind of borrowed or reallocated, if you will, from other industries and other fields. I mean, fine art shipping and fine art still very small niche industry. So what we usually use are builder's tubes, and they can change in size from 12 inches, 18 inches, 24 inches. There's a range of standard sizes. We usually start around 12 inches. That seems to be the size that for a lot of the stuff that we've been doing lately, which is probably in the 8 by 8 to maybe 10 by 20 foot range. What we generally do is we can pad out because a building tube is not an archival material. What we generally do is seal that sometimes with micro bubble, and sometimes with Tyvek, which is also a construction material. Sometimes we'll use Dartek. It really depends. We have a bunch of options, but what we'll do is basically sheathe that building tube with a material that'll kind of act as that will protect the piece and protect the tube, so to speak. And then
I really do sympathise with artists that have dwindling studio space and are looking for ways to store their work, but also be able to access that work in order to be able to show gallerists or potential clients. So there's no real easy way to get around it. I know that Wovo are looking to expand their storage facilities. Even Long Island City can become not a great long-term price point for artists, and they're going to move some of their operations up further upstate New York. So all of that to say, just make sure you always get really good quality, well-lit pictures, photographs of anything before you store it, because this is actually a surprise to me, but more and more people are buying art based upon photographs that they can see online or in catalogues. So as long as you have those really great quality snaps, you have a chance at least of, getting a good indication of whether or not a client is going to buy a piece of art from you.
Yeah, and also, to kind of dovetail on that is the brick and mortar gallery is kind of moving away from that to online. And one of the things that we've noticed at Wovo is that our viewing rooms are being used more and more by online galleries. It's quite expensive to run a gallery in Chelsea, here in Chelsea, I should say. The costs of renting out a space don't necessarily match the attendance you get for that month. And so there's been a little bit of a movement, and again, also all the fairs that come up nowadays. I mean, there's Armory just passed, ADAA just passed. That with all of the fairs that all the gallerists are running to all around the world, not just in the U.S. but all around the world, not all the gallerists are seeing the need to have a brick and mortar space when they can kind of push out their artist work on the internet, and then if they need a view, they can rent a viewing room somewhere. It gives them a little bit of a different option, and that seems to be a little bit of the trend in the industry at large. Does that help you answer your question? Do you have any more questions about how to? Yeah, we can talk afterwards, of course. Yeah.
So many.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work as a museum professional. I've worked a lot with this is kind of after 9/11, there was a big push for firemen and policemen to really become in touch with the history of their particular departments. And I've done a lot of work with some local fire departments, and some of the solutions that we've come up with, a lot of them are carpenters on the sides, and some of the solutions that we've come up with have been some pretty basic. I mean, nothing fantastic and nothing expensive, but with some pretty basic carpentry skills, we've been able to really change their storage area and change their thinking about how they need to store their helmets and stuff like that. I mean, I think I don't want to name the place where I was, but one of the firehouses that I helped, I went into their storage room and they literally had a pile in the corner of helmets and jackets and stuff like that. I mean, in that case, helmets you just have to put shelves on, and the jackets you really just need a hanger for. I mean, it's not, this isn't a high-minded solution. I mean, they're pretty simple solutions, and working. It's crazy, but they thought I was a genius for coming up with hangers and a pole. It's not, and in an afternoon we were able to really change not just their thinking about their own history, but the potential for how they could store them, moving forward. And it's happened a couple of times, especially at firehouses. I like a firehouse, so I don't mind helping. Yeah, and I worked at the Newark Museum for a few years, and they actually have the Newark Firemen's Historical Society is actually stationed at the Newark Museum, so I had the good fortune of working with them for a few years. But it's cool stuff. I just like that stuff. Yeah. But like I said, the point of all that is just to say that the solutions are much more accessible than people realize. I mean, not everything has to be archival that we kind of talked about earlier. There are other options that are as legitimate.
I have a question for Lucy. How much, according to your experience among your clients, how much they have in mind about investment when they buy a painting? Rather than love of the work.
Yeah, so that's actually really a very easy question for me to answer, even though it's so broad, because typically the clients that I work with are looking for if they're looking for a piece of work that's considered large, and let's take this piece of work behind us as a guideline, they'd be looking to spend somewhere in the range of $7,000 to $12,000. So, gosh, I just gave you a really big range, I realise that. But I hope that kind of helps you understand.
But I think the question was more, how interested are they in that value when they want to sell it later, as opposed to how much they love it and want to have it on the wall?
Yeah, thank you.
So, explain that to me again.
Art as an asset, or art as an investment, as opposed to art as something that you love.
Oh, okay. In the price bracket, which I've just been really overshared about, I would say that most people are really looking for a forever piece for themselves and for their families. So they want it to be able to be passed down as an heirloom quality piece, but in terms of resale, it's not on their minds. In the price point that we just talked about for the client base that I have. And I'm very realistic about that as I go through my business and as I sell art. I think that there's so much mystery around fine art, and what I prefer to do with my clients in the price bracket that we're talking about is empower my clients to really fall in love with pieces that they can appreciate from their own hearts, rather than from what the director of fine art at Sotheby's perhaps tells them they should be falling in love with. So I hope that makes sense.
Yes.
And Lucy, I mean, what Lucy's describing here is a relationship with her clients that allows them to learn from her, them to learn from her experiences and her dealings with them. So it's kind of a nice relationship to have, to actually, for the client at least to learn. And they may buy something that the first purchase 10 years later they might not even like it. Their taste may change and stuff like that. And that's kind of it's a relationship. And a lot of what we talk about at Wobo are relationships with our clients. We're not looking to just hang one piece. We're looking for you to come to us for more than that, and kind of create a dialogue that's ongoing. And we find that most of our clients, as probably Lucy will find, or has found, kind of want to be part of that dialogue. I mean, everybody that has a crane outside of their house comes out and looks at it. Everyone. Their children love it. It's kind of like the Tonka trucks, the videos of the Tonka trucks. Whenever we crane pieces into our places, the people love to see it, and people on the street are walking by on their phone, not knowing why there's a painting swinging above them, but they love that experience, and it kind of, I don't know, it brings them a little bit closer to their artwork, I feel.
What covers the cost of the crane?
I can't really get into cost. I mean, it varies widely depending on time of day, time of year, number of works.
Who pays for it? Who pays for it?
Is that implicit in the sale of the work, or?
No. Not in most cases. Not. In most cases, the client is working. A lot of our individual clients are working within our advisory or with a consulting firm, and they generally know. A lot of times, they generally know what can and cannot make it into a building. And that's simply by taking a tape measure and measuring your ups and your downs and your diagonals. And so a lot of the art advisories will know what will and will not fit. And so they're already thinking, oh wow, we have let's say a 9x9 Gerhard Richter that's gonna need to go. I mean, the 9x9 piece is not going to fit through most doors. It's not going to fit in most buildings. And you also have to look at the times the buildings were built. We do a lot of work on the Upper East Side, and a lot of those buildings were built turn of the century, 1910, 20s, 30s, and none of those elevators are going to allow for a 9x9 painting. Some of the newer buildings, maybe like the Bloomberg building, I mean, that building's not that old. They might potentially have a freight elevator. Some of the buildings have freight elevators that, I don't know if people are familiar with this, but actually you can pull an entire truck on, an entire box truck, if you've seen them. One of the buildings down the block here has, I think you can put 2 or 3, you can put 4 trucks at a time, and that's a full-size box truck, which is quite large, and that gives you an opportunity to get it into your building. So.
The client pays for the crane.
Yeah, I mean, well,
The person who's buying the painting. Do they also have to pay for the crane?
Of course. I mean, if you're looking at this is a totally different price point than we spoke about earlier, but a Gerhard Richter is going to be, they're going to understand what the difficulties are, what the issues are with getting that into their building. There's rarely is someone surprised that something doesn't fit into their building. They're usually pretty aware of it. And they kind of built that into that whole transaction. If they'd like to show it, would they like to show it here in New York in their apartment, or would they like to show it out in the Hamptons or possibly Palm Springs? Not that long ago, I did install a Gerhard Richter in Palm Springs, and luckily enough, they had these beautiful patio doors that were, I think they were about 10 feet high, and it went into their house with absolute ease. But they also have an apartment here in New York, and there is no way, there's absolutely no way that piece would go into their apartment in the city without removing a window. And so that's something that you would probably call a company or again your consultant to kind of suss that out. We would do a site visit and come out and take measurements and figure out what the piece was, what the issues were. You're not going to roll the Gerhard Richter. Yeah, I don't think Gerhard Richter is not going to get it. That's not to say that in every case it wouldn't get rolled, with the client's permission, with the artist as alive, the artist is alive, so possibly with the artist's permission and with a consultation by a conservator in that case. I mean, if you're purchasing a Gerhard Richter,
you're talking about the abstract works or the.
It doesn't really matter. The price points are pretty unimaginable, and so there's a lot more. Again, like I said before about rolling your piece, there's a lot more that goes. It's conversations that go on for weeks, if not months, in terms of determining, what the viable solutions are. If that helps.
But yeah, certainly in almost all cases, it is the responsibility of the purchaser to pay for transportation, especially if there's any, extenuating circumstances. So, in the price points that we were discussing earlier, we definitely have to figure out if that even makes sense from an economical perspective to have, work that needs to be craned around. Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, even at a smaller price point, you're not, if it's $1,000 piece, do you really want to spend thousands of dollars in order to rig it into your home? I mean, you might want a smaller work. I mean, and actually, this is a great example of a gallery that has kind of a variety of sizes, and not that the work should depend on sizes, because it's the aesthetic value that you should be looking at and purchasing, and not the size. But yeah.
Tim, do you find that it's always the case that the purchaser pays for the shipping?
We work it out. I mean, that's,
Yeah, our experience, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. No, our experience is, most of the time it's like buying something at Target. You buy something, it's your responsibility to get it home. So it's pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same deal. Most of Chelsea handles things that way. But a lot of them will partner with fine art services companies, and they may be able to provide you a better rate by using theirs. Occasionally, some of the larger Chelsea galleries do have their own little shuttles and their own trucks and whatnot. So again, you could work something out, with especially if you're local, if you're in Manhattan, it may not be such a big deal to get it, or in Brooklyn or Queens, if you will.
Actually, there is something with this though, because as I was shipping this stuff for this show, as a fellow that's bought things for me before decided to buy a piece, and we were able to ship all this work at the same time. It made a difference as to how expensive it was when we shipped it. So.
I found the difficulty because my work's huge. My work's bigger than the studio.
Huge. Dimmed.
Well, the one I'm showing at the moment is an 11-foot diameter circle.
Okay.
But my studio is only 7 foot high. So it was I was like an ant,
Yeah.
just being on her back trying to.
Yeah.
Because so when that happens, that actually affects the work. The size of the studio and the work. So I made it in 8 pieces.
Yeah.
And also I didn't know when it first started that it was going to be a circle. It told me that it was to be a circle. So it's how that evolves, and the size of the space that you're working in actually changes the work.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I as a registrar in my former career with with museums, one of the things that I kind of was proud of for how I handle things was I'm quite good at I'm kind of a fabricator in my past life, and so what I generally have been able to do pretty successfully is work with artists to kind of make their idea or take their concept and kind of bring it to fruition. And over the years, that's been different things for different artists. But a lot of times, there's not a lot of knowledge about fabrication or archival materials, kind of like we kind of touched on earlier. And so, with a little bit of learning and a little bit of dialogue, you can always get to the end. And I think most of the time, I could say 90% of the time, the artists that I've worked with have been quite happy about where we've ended up. And I've had animals taxidermied and built buildings within buildings and all kinds of crazy stuff. Over the years, I've been the guy that people have called for their crazy ideas, and I try not to shy away from too much, because at the end of the day, I kind of want for the artist's intent for that idea to come to fruition. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of working with artists and being allowed the privilege of working with artists, is to kind of get to that final moment where we can all be like, aha, this is fantastic.
Well, my background is a little, I'm probably, maybe I'm more aware of the archival things than some of the people, because there can be really good ideas. But it's, this is pretty traditional painting in lots of ways. But even the animal grounds and stuff like that are a little dicier to work with. These things have lasted hundreds of years already, and the pigments I'm using are pretty standard things as well.
Tim, if you're working toward a show and you know, like this show is going to have pieces of different sizes, do you ever take a step back before diving into the next piece and say, when in this process would it be the right time for me to work on the big piece? Because that's going to take up a lot of space, not just in my brain, but actually physical space. Or do you think about that, or is it just whatever's next is next?
Whatever is next is usually the case. I mean, again, this is a group of work that evolved over a 3-year period, and maybe initially I'll be starting some smaller things to really get ideas about stuff. A part of my studio space is devoted to storage to begin with, so there are pieces from a couple of previous shows in there. So it's not. I'm not that calculated, I suppose.
Tim, can you talk more about your process on the line works? Do you have the frames already made for you and things like that?
I generally do. Again, it's a small operation. I do most of the things myself. So, like I say, I'll grid up things from smaller pieces and stuff. But I make my own stretcher frames. So I make my own ground. So all that stuff is done by me. No studio assistants.
Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, Tim, for this beautiful work, Lucy and Jacob, for all of your wonderful insights. So working hard, it's lots of issues, lots of